Section 23 of Astounding Stories 16, April 1931. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Beth Thomas. Astounding Stories 16, April 1931, by Various. The Ghost World, by Sewell, Peaslee, Wright. Part 2. I think I was conscious several seconds before I finally opened my eyes. My mind was still wandering. My thoughts kept flying around in huge circles that kept closing in. We had hit the meteorite. I remembered the crash. I remembered falling. I remembered striking my head. But I was still alive. There was air to breathe, and there was firm material under me. I opened my eyes. For the first instant it seemed I was in an utterly strange room. Nothing was familiar. Everything was inverted. Then I glanced upward, and I saw what had happened. I was lying on the ceiling of the navigating room. Over my head were the charts, still glowing, the chronometers in their gimbaled beds and the television disc. Beside me, sprawled out limply, was Corey, a trickle of dried blood on his cheek. A litter of papers, chairs, framed licenses, and other movable objects was strewn on and around us. My first instinctive foolish thought was that the ship was upside down. Man has a ground-trained mind, no matter how many years he may travel space. Then, of course, I realized that in the open void there is not top or bottom. The illusion is supplied in spaceships by the gravity pads. Somehow the shock of impact had reversed the polarity of the leads to the pads, and they had become repulsion pads. That was why I had dropped from the floor to the ceiling. All this flashed through my mind in an instant as I dragged myself towards Corey. Dragged myself because my head was throbbing so that I dared not stand up, and one shoulder, my left, was numb. For an instant I thought that Corey was dead. Then, as I bent over him, I saw a pulse leaping just under the angle of his jaw. "Corey, old man," I whispered, "do you hear me?" All the formality of the service was forgotten for the time. "Are you hurt badly?" His eyes flickered and he sighed. Then suddenly he looked up at me and smiled. "We're still here, sir?" "After a fashion. Look around. See what's happened?" He glanced about curiously, frowning. His wits were not all with him yet. "We're in a mess, aren't we?" he grinned. "What's the matter?" I told him what I thought, and he nodded slowly, feeling his head tenderly. "How long ago did it happen?" he asked. "The blooming clock's upside down. Can you read it?" I could, with an effort. "Over 20 minutes," I said. "I wonder how the rest of the men are." With an effort I got to my feet and peered into the operating room. Several of the men were moving about dazedly, and as I signalled to them reassuringly, a voice hailed us from the doorway. "Any orders, sir?" It was Kincaid. He was peering over what had been the top of the doorway, and he was probably the most disreputable-looking officer who had ever worn the blue and silver uniform of the service. His nose was bloody and swollen to twice its normal size. Both eyes were blackened, and his hair, matted with blood, was plastered in ragged swirls across his forehead. "Yes, Mr. Kincaid, plenty of them. Round up enough of the men to locate the trouble with the gravity pads. There's a reversed connection somewhere. But don't let them make the repairs until the signal's given, otherwise we'll all fall on our heads again. Mr. Corey and I will take care of the injured." The next half hour was a trying one. 2 men had been killed outright, and another died before we could do anything to save him. Every man in the crew was shaken up and bruised, but by the time the check was completed we had a good half of our personnel on duty. Returning at last to the navigating room, I pressed the attention signal for Kincaid and got his answer immediately. "Located the trouble yet, Mr. Kincaid?" I asked anxiously. "Yes, sir. Mr. Hendricks has been working with a group of men and has just made his report. They are ready when you are." "Good." I drew a sigh of relief. It had been easier than I thought. Pressing the general attention signal, I broadcasted the warning, giving particular instructions to the men in charge of the injured. Then I issued orders to Hendricks. "Reverse the current in 5 seconds, Mr. Hendricks, and stand by for further instructions." Hastily then, Corey and I followed the orders we had given the men. Briefly, we stood on our heads against the wall, feeling very foolish, and dreading the fall we knew was coming. It came. We slid down the wall and lit heavily on our feet, while the litter that had been on the ceiling with us fell all around us. Miraculously, the ship seemed to have righted herself. Corey and I picked ourselves up and looked around. "We're still operating smoothly," I commented with a sweeping glance at the instruments over the operating table. "Everything seems in order." "Did you notice the speed indicator, sir?" asked Corey grimly. "When he fell, one of the men in the operating room must have pulled the speed lever all the way over. We're at maximum space speed, sir, and have been for nearly an hour, with no one at the controls." We stared at each other dully. Nearly an hour at maximum space speed, a speed seldom used except in case of great emergency, with no one at the controls and the ship set at maximum deflection from her course. That meant that for nearly an hour we had been sweeping into infinite space in a great arc, at a speed I dislike to think about. "I'll work out our position at once," I said, "and in the meantime reduce speed to normal as quickly as possible. We must get back on our course at the earliest possible moment." We hurried across to the charts that were our most important aids in proper navigation. By comparing the groups of stars there with our space charts of the universe, the working out of our position was ordinarily a simple matter. But now, instead of milky rectangles ruled with fine black lines, with a fiery red speck in the centre and the bodies of the universe grouped around in green points of light, there were only nearly black rectangles, shot through with vague, flickering lights that revealed nothing except the presence of disaster. "The meteoric fragment wiped out some of our plates, I imagine," said Corey slowly. "The thing's useless." I nodded, staring down at the crawling lights on the charts. "We'll have to set down for repairs, Mr. Corey. If," I added, "we can find a place." Corey glanced up at the attraction meter. "I'll take a look in the big disk," he suggested. "There's a sizable body off to port. Perhaps our luck's changed." He bent his head under the big hood, adjusting the control until he located the source of the registered attraction. "Right," he said after a moment's careful scrutiny. "She's as big as Earth, I'd venture, and I believe I can detect clouds, so there should be atmosphere. Shall we try it, sir?" "Yes, we're helpless until we make repairs. As big as Earth, you said? Is she familiar?" Corey studied the image under the hood again, long and carefully. "No, sir," he said, looking up and shaking his head. "She's a new one on me." Conning the ship first by means of the television disc, and navigating visually as we neared the strange sphere, we were soon close enough to make out the physical characteristics of this unknown world. Our spectroscopic tests had revealed the presence of atmosphere suitable for breathing, although strongly laden with mineral fumes which, while possibly objectionable, would probably not be dangerous. So far as we could see, there was but one continent, somewhat north of the equator, roughly triangular in shape, with its northmost point reaching nearly to the pole. "It's an unexplored world, sir, I'm certain of that," said Corey. "I'm sure I would have remembered that single triangular continent had I seen it on any of our charts." In those days, of course, the universe was by no means so well mapped as it is today. "If not unknown, it is at least uncharted," I replied. "Rough-looking country, isn't it? No sign of life, either, that the disc will reveal." "That's as well, sir. Better no people than wild natives who might interfere with our work. Any choice in the matter of a spot on which to set her down?" I inspected the great triangular continent carefully. Towards the north it was a mass of snow-covered mountains, some of them, from their craters, dead volcanoes. Long spurs of these ranges reached southward, with green and apparently fertile valleys between. The southern edge was covered with dense tropical vegetation, a veritable jungle. "At the base of that central spur there seems to be a sort of plateau," I suggested. "I believe that would be a likely spot." "Very well, sir," replied Corey, and the old Ertak, reduced to atmospheric speed, swiftly swept towards the indicated position, while Corey kept a wary eye on the surface temperature gauge, and I swept the terrain for any sign of intelligent life. I found a number of trails, particularly around the base of the foothills, but they were evidently game trails, for there were no dwelling places of any kind, no cities, no villages, not even a single habitation of any kind that the searching eyes of the disc could detect. Corey set her down as neatly and as softly as a rose petal drifts to the ground. Roses, I may add, are a beautiful and delicate flower with very soft petals, peculiar to my native Earth. We opened the main exit immediately. I watched the huge circular door back slowly out of its threads and finally swing aside, swiftly and silently, in the grip of its mighty gimbals, with the weird, unearthly feeling I have always had when about to step foot on some strange star where no man has trod before. The air was sweet and delightfully fresh after being cooped up for weeks in the Ertak with her machine-made air. A little thinner, I should judge, than the air to which we were accustomed, but strangely exhilarating, and laden with the faint scent of some unknown constituent, undoubtedly the mineral element our spectroscope had revealed but not identified. Gravity, I found upon passing through the exit, was normal. Altogether an extremely satisfactory repair station. Corey's guess as to what had happened proved absolutely accurate. Along the top of the Ertak, from amidships to within a few feet of her pointed stern, was a jagged groove that had destroyed hundreds of the bright coppery discs set into the outer skin of the ship that operated our super radio reflex charts. The groove was so deep in places that it must have bent the outer skin of the Ertak down against the inner skin. A foot or more. It was best not to think of what would have happened then. By the time we completed our inspection, dusk was upon us. A long, lingering dusk, due no doubt to the afterglow resulting from the mineral content of the air. I'm no white-skinned, stoop-shouldered laboratory man, so I'm not sure that was the real reason. It sounds logical, however. Mr. Corey, I think we shall break out our field equipment and give all men not on watch an opportunity to sleep out in the fresh air, I said. Will you give the orders, please? Yes, sir. Mr. Hendricks will stand the 8 to 12 watch as usual? I nodded. Mr. Kincaid will relieve him at midnight, and you will take over at 4. Very well, sir. Corey turned to give the orders, and in a few minutes an orderly array of shelter tents made a single street in front of the fat, dully gleaming side of the Ertak. Our tents were at the head of this short company street, 3 of them in a little row. After the evening meal, cooked over open fires, with the smoke of the very resinous wood we had collected hanging comfortably in the still air, the men gave themselves up to boisterous, noisy games which, I confess, I should have liked very much to participate in. They raced and tumbled around the 2 big fires like schoolboys on a lark. Only those who have spent most of their days in the metal belly of a spaceship know the sheer joy of utter physical freedom. Corey, Kincaid and I sat before our tents and watched them, chatting about this and that, I have long since forgotten what. But I shall never forget what occurred just before the watch changed that night, nor will any man of the Ertak's crew. It was just a few minutes before midnight. The men had quieted down and were preparing to turn in. I had given orders that this first night they could suit themselves about retiring. A good officer, and I tried to be one, is never afraid to give good men a little rein now and then. The fires had died down to great heaps of red coals filmed with ashes, and, aside from the brilliant galaxy of stars overhead, there was no light from above. Either this world had no moons, not even a single moon like my native Earth, or it had not yet arisen. Kincaid rose lazily, stretched himself and glanced at his watch. 7 till 12, sir, he said. I believe I'll run along and relieve... He never finished that sentence. From somewhere there came a rushing sound, and a damp, stringy net, a living, horrible something, descended upon us out of the night. In an instant, what had been an orderly encampment became bedlam. I tried to fight against the stringy, animated, nearly intangible mass, or masses, that held me, but my arms, my legs, my whole body was bound as with strings and loops of elastic bands. Strange whispering sounds filled the air, audible above the shouting of the men. The net about me grew tighter. I felt myself being lifted from the ground. Others were being treated the same way. One of the Ertak's crew shot straight up not a dozen feet away, writhing and squirming. Then, at an elevation of perhaps twice my height, he was hurried away. Hendrick's voice called out my name from the Ertak's exit, and I shouted a warning. "Hendrick, go back! Close the emergency—" Then a gluey mass cut across my mouth, and, as though carried on huge soft springs, I was hurried away, with the sibilant whispering sounds louder and closer than ever. With me, as nearly as I could judge, went every man who had not been on duty in the ship. I ceased struggling, and immediately the rubbery network about me loosened. It seemed to me that the whisperings about me were suddenly approving. We were in the grip, then, of some sort of intelligent beings, ghost-like and invisible though they were. After a time, during which we were all in a ragged group being borne swiftly towards the mountains, all at a common level from the ground, I managed to turn my head so that I could see against the starlit sky something of the nature of the things that had made us captive. As is not infrequently the case, in trying to describe things of an utterly different world, I find myself at a loss for words. I think of jellyfish, such as inhabit the seas of most inhabited planets, and yet this is not a good description. These creatures were pale and almost completely transparent. What their forms might be I could not even guess. I could make out writhing, tentacle-like arms and wrinkled, flabby excrudescences, and that was all. That these creatures were huge was evident from the fact that they, apparently walking from an irregular undulating motion, held us easily 10 or a dozen feet from the ground. With the release of pressure about my body I was able to talk again, and I called out to Corey, who was fighting his way along, muttering angrily just ahead of me. "Corey, no use fighting them. Save your strength, man." "Them? What are they, in God's name? What spawn of hell?" "The commander's right, Corey," interrupted Kincaid, who was not far from my first officer. "Let's get our breaths and try to figure out what's happened. I'm winded." His voice gave plentiful evidence of the struggle he had put up. "I want to know where I'm going and why," growled Corey, ceasing his struggling nevertheless. "What have us? Are they fish or flesh or fowl?" "I think we shall know before long, Corey," I replied. "Look ahead." The bearers of the men in the forepart of the group had apparently stopped before a shadowy wall, like the face of a cliff. Rapidly the rest of us were brought up until we were in a compact group, some in sitting positions, some upside down, the majority reclining on back or side. The whispering sound was now intense and excited, as though our strange bearers awaited some momentous happening. I took advantage of the opportunity to speak very briefly to my companions. "Men, I'll admit frankly that I don't know what we're up against," I said. "But I do know this, that we'll come out on top of the heap. Conserve your strength, keep your eyes open, and be prepared to obey, instantly, any orders that may be issued. I know that last remark is not needed. If any of you should see or learn something of interest or value, report at once to Mr. Corey, Mr. Kincaid, or my—" A simultaneous involuntary exclamation from the men interrupted me, and it was not surprising that this was so, for the wall before us had suddenly opened, and there was a great burst of yellow light in our faces. A strong odour, like the faint scent we had first noticed in the air, but infinitely more powerful, struck our nostrils, but I was not conscious of the fact for several seconds. My whole attention, my every startled thought, was focused upon the group of strange beings, silhouetted against the glowing light, that stood in the opening. Imagine, if you can, a huge globe, perhaps 8 feet in diameter, flattened slightly at the bottom, and supported on 6 short, huge stumps, like the feet of an elephant, and topped by an excrudescence like a rounded coning tower, merging into the globular body. From points slightly below this excrudescence, visualize 6 long, limp tentacles, so long that they drop from the equators of these animated spheres and trail on the ground. Now you have some conception of the beings that stood before us. A sharp, sibilant whispering came from one of these figures, to be answered in an eager chorus from our bearers. There was a reply like a command, and the group in the doorway marched forward. One by one these visible tentacles wrapped themselves around a member of the Ertak's crew, each one of the globular creatures bearing one of us. I heard a disappointed whisper go up from the outer darkness where, but for a moment before, we had been. Then there was a grating sound and a thud as the stone doorway was rolled back into place. The entrance was sealed. We were prisoners indeed. End of section 23.